For a decade, 11 Warriors has been your online home for Ohio State information. This year, we're taking it to the airwaves. I'm Aaron Goldstein, and this is the 11 Warriors Report. We debut on the same week as the 2016 Buckeyes debut. Ohio State is inexperienced but hungry. If you paid attention at all, you've seen last season's stars shining bright on the NFL stage. And yet, the expectations here remain unchanged. These young Bucks are chomping at the bit to prove they are worthy of the scarlet and gray.
I want to see 11 players playing together as one. I mean, we've practiced. We have individual periods throughout the day, but we all come together as one during a few periods during practice, and that's when we show you. That's when you play your best ball, when we're all playing together as one.
We may be young on paper, but it doesn't really. You really couldn't tell.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're really looking forward to seeing it actually when you're playing somebody else this Saturday.
We have been here before, haven't we? You remember it was just 2 years ago where a young Ohio State team was charged with replacing much of its offensive line, its star running back as well, and eventually, remember, even its quarterback. We know how 2014 ended, and Urban Meyer is not shying away from those comparisons.
Very similar, and I'm really excited about him. I'm trying to hold down the excitement because I really am. I can't wait to watch him play. I made the comment, young team that's not very talented is not, but this is a talented team and good guys. I mean, this has been a good camp, good people to work with.
So that is the setup. Now it's time to bring on our panel. Here is 11 Warriors, Beau Bishop.
All right, Goldie, thank you very much. Brought on by our beat reporters, Tim Shoemaker, Eric Seeger, and the pride of Lancaster, Bobby Carpenter, here as well. I want to start, Tim, with the last comment you heard from Urban, how he's not shying away from the comparisons to 2014. It's something we talked about on the Dubcast. Boy, it's almost like he wouldn't say that unless he knew something. Were you surprised how much he's embraced that?
Yeah, a little bit. Because as you know, as everybody knows, how the 2014 season ended with Ohio State winning a national championship. I think Urban Meyer kind of knows what he's doing when he says that this 2016 team reminds him of that 2014 team won. So yeah, it was a little bit surprising, but Ohio State has a ton of talent, and I think everybody knows that. I don't think that's a secret. It just kind of depends on how these young guys perform in a game, and we'll find out on Saturday.
Six, does the talent and what you've seen in the practices you've been to match up to taking on that type of responsibility?
Absolutely, and in some places it might actually exceed it, just because a lot of that 2014 team was really that 2013 recruiting class kind of coming into its own, and now you've got a couple more years behind on the recruiting trail of these just outrageous athletes, doing really great stuff for Urban, and the entire staff has done well with recruiting, and the rankings, in the top 5 every single year, it feels like, when the recruiting rankings kind of like speak for themselves. So I think that it certainly rivals that, if not, exceeds it.
Bob, a huge difference, of course, from 2014 and this year, though, is that in 2014, we went into that season with Braxton Miller. We didn't think we were going to be without Brax, that the injury happens and away we go. But once the injury of Braxton occurred, the expectations dwindled a great deal because you didn't know what you're going to get with JT Barrett. That is not the case here. This is a team that's preseason in the top 10 of everybody's polls. I heard Brett Murray of ESPN picks him to win the national championship. Despite replacing all of this, the expectation remains. Is that, I don't know, fair is probably not the right word, but is that just?
Well, I think it is just because you look at the positions that they do return. They're returning very key positions. Quarterback, JT Barrett, a leader there. Pat Elflein at center, a leadership position there on the offensive line. And then Raekwon McMillan, who we saw earlier, really the guy who's going to orchestrate that entire defense. So you have the big pieces taken care of. Since those are taken care of now, there's a lot of talent that Urban's been recruiting, and they do have some other guys, Garyon Conley, Tyquan Lewis coming back, Billy Price, guys who have played in big games, understand the moment. So now it's, can they place those talented guys they've recruited over the last 3 and 4 years, can those guys slide in and be able to fill in accordingly? Urban's not shying away from the expectations and the comparisons, which is very surprising for most head coaches.
Couldn't believe it.
Managing expectations is a big piece of it, but I think that they do have a team that is capable of it. It's talent-wise, can they get there? It's the experience. How fast will they mature?
A lot of it, I think, comes to the fact that he's only lost 4 games in 4 seasons. I mean, he knows what he's doing, and that's
Right.
when you're talking about the expectations. That's kind of what the precedent has been set. So it's not going to change.
You guys all know like how calculated he is. He's not saying that unless he absolutely believes it. So for him to say it, he believes it. This is also the second act for him, in my view. Like this is the beginning of his second act at Ohio State. He had these first 4 years that were off the charts, very similar to Florida. And then did he learn from his experience at Florida, Bob, and how that went off the rails towards the end of his time there? This doesn't appear that this thing's going off the rails at all. This appears to be a freight train going 100 miles an hour still. And I'm curious if he did learn from it. It appears that he has. It appears he's got a program that's completely sustainable and completely void of being able to go off the rails.
Well, I think part of it too is you look at the leadership. Urban's second act at Florida, Tim Tebow had left and graduated. He was gone. So he didn't have that steady leadership presence at the quarterback position. He still has JT Barrett here for a couple more years. That's going to make it much better. And I think you recruit a higher quality kid at Ohio State than you may at Florida. And you've seen they really haven't had to deal with all the off the field issues. Sure, you're always going to have 1 or 2 a season with almost any college program, but you don't see the numbers of them that he had late in his career at Florida.
Tim, and speaking of those off-field issues, we had one this week that surprised some on game week. With Torrance Gibson, a kid who was the ballyhooed recruit a couple of years ago, who went from quarterback to receiver, has well documented, had some issues in terms of that transition coming to Ohio State. He's been kicked out of school for a semester. Your kind of feel on that, and do you think he'll ever play for Ohio State again? My inclination would be probably not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Torrance Gibson, as you mentioned, was arguably the highest profile recruit in Ohio State's 2015 class, and came here as a quarterback, turned into wide receiver, and that's a tough transition for anybody. It's not impossible. People have done it before, but he got in some trouble, and to be honest, for this season particularly, I'm not sure that the suspension is a big deal, so to speak. He was kind of middle to lower part on the depth chart in the pecking order at wide receiver because it's a very, very talented position. As far as will he ever play at Ohio State, Urban said earlier today that he has no inclination that he's going to leave, but it might be one of those things where he just never gets it, and he might move on to better things.
So that is the backdrop, Goldie, as we get set for the 2016 season. Much more to come, I am sure, sir.
You got it. The discussion for the 2016 season already underway. We'll have much more coming up in a little bit, as Beau said. Up next, we dig out on the opener. Bowling Green coming to town. What type of Buckeye onslaught will they be facing? You're watching the 11 Warriors Report on Time Warner Cable Sports Channel. Well, we mentioned earlier the players that OSU lost to the NFL this season. Ezekiel Elliott looks like he's going to be a star in Dallas. Michael Thomas, the same in New Orleans. Braxton Miller has shined in Houston. Heck, Jalen Marshall even looked like he's a player in New York. We are talking about playmakers, offensive swag, production. Urban Meyer, he's got a bunch to replace. Oh, but there is a plan to replace it. That plan contains a truly balanced offense, and this team might just be capable of pulling it off.
More obvious Saturday, but we have depth at receiver. We have a returning quarterback that understands what we're trying to do, and at the end of the day, it's 250 is the perfect. And we've had some close to that, but last year was imbalanced, and we have to be very balanced.
So what will the 2016 Buckeyes look like? That is the question for our panel, Beau.
All right, Goldie. Bob, I'm going to start with you on this one because, when you replace all, $111 million, that was well put out, that tweet, by the way, $111 million in contracts. But when I think about the guy to replace, it's Ezekiel Elliott in terms of what he did from pass protection, catching the ball, running the ball, their whole offense. Can you talk about going about it from a football perspective, trying to replace a guy who did all of those things?
Well, it's not just the yardage that he produced, but it's the play calling. And Urban talked about earlier in his press conference here this week is they want to be a 50-50 ball club. Last year they weren't. They were probably 65-35, some games almost 70-30 because they had the availability of Ezekiel Elliott to bail them out. Whenever you're not getting yards, you can still call up a run on 3rd and 5 and have a reasonable expectation to get the first down. So now without that, it's going to adjust the play calling. You're going to have to modify that and understand what does Mike Weber do well? How can we feature him? How can we feature Curtis Samuel? Because as good as Zeke was, I think some of the other guys got lost in the wash a little bit because you knew what you had, and maybe you didn't necessarily want to expand outside of that box to give other guys a shot.
Yeah, that's interesting, the Swiss Army knife approach, Eric. And Bob mentioned two guys that I think we all think will be the guys, Mike and Curtis Samuel. Being creative with Curtis, but also Mike is the bell cow. What have you seen in the practices you've been at to let you think that Mike can handle that and that Curtis can be somebody who we all kind of think can flash?
Well, a lot of what I've seen from Mike is he's really light on his feet, and he's not the biggest guy as far as he's only like 5'10" or so, but I mean, the guy can be a wrecking ball, and he's kind of in that mold of Carlos Hyde, maybe not as big, but kind of the similar way, kind of a heavy runner and a downhill guy. So, you know, I think that's what a lot of what they're looking for from him is to be that guy that maybe to go between the tackles and get those 2-3 tough yards that you were talking about with Zeke. It would get on 3rd and 5, and then Curtis is kind of a Swiss Army knife in himself. I mean, he backed up Zeke as a true freshman at running back and then played wide receiver last year. So, you know, they're going to use him a lot, I think, both on running plays and in passing plays and in the return game.
Tim, between Mike and Curtis, obviously you need contributions from both, but between those two, which one do you think shines brightest this year?
I think Curtis Samuel is a special player, Beau. I think he deserves to get the ball at least 15 times a game, however that might be. I think Mike Weber's going to be a very good player too. They're both, obviously, like Eric said, they're different guys, but I think Curtis Samuel's got all the tools to be an all Big Ten performer this year.
Bob, at receiver, no Mike Thomas, no Braxton, no Jalen, as Aaron said, but yet you feel like there's a ton of talent, and Noah Brown leads that group. I mean, there's a bunch of thoroughbreds out there, and it's a matter of who's going to step up. Is that an accurate description?
You know, and this is what's going to be very interesting to see early in the season. I think Noah Brown is the one constant. I think you're going to see Curtis Samuel out there a lot in the slot. And if part of his situation, he got bumped because Braxton, they threw him in there last year playing slot. He's playing the H position. All of a sudden, well, he's 2-time silver football. Right. Time for you to bump down on the depth chart. So I think you'll see those two guys. And then really the third position, who rolls in, I think is going to be a function of how well they play in these first couple games. And, you know, Urban has mentioned there's a litany of guys to choose from. Torrance Gibson is gone, but outside of that, there's probably 7 or 8 guys that they're really looking to fill in, you know, that third starting spot and maybe back up everyone else. So you're looking at probably 4 potential openings, and it's going to be who makes the plays because they're all very talented.
And guys, the warm blanket over it all, real quick from both of you guys, is JT Barrett. Yeah. Are we expecting too much? No, last 2 games last year he was off the charts. Is that the JT Barrett we're all basing this all on, right? Is that we're going to get that JT Barrett or the one from 2 years ago?
I think a lot of us have kind of like fell into that hole. We're expecting 2014 JT Barrett to come back, and it's fair to compare it to that because there's no Cardell Jones, you know, pushing him from behind, you know, a guy that won the national championship for the team when JT went down with the injury. So, you know, it is a lot on JT, but I don't know if it's possible. I feel like he's kind of matured even more than when he was playing as a freshman. So, you know, if there is one guy you're going to put all that on for this team, I think it's going to be him, and that's obviously what Coach Meyer's doing.
Real quick, Bob.
You know what's interesting, though, but also there's no Devin Smith, there's no Michael Thomas, there's no Jalen Marshall, Jeff Hireman, Nick Vanette, all those guys who helped him. Right. He's going to have to be the guy now that drives the offense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of questions, and yet we have a lot of confidence. Aaron, I guess that's the way it is at Ohio State, right?
Yeah, there always is confidence, and that's what we're thinking about Ohio State. But don't forget, there are 13 other teams in the conference. Up next, we tackle the rest of the Big Ten. That is the 11 Warriors Report on Time Warner Cable Sports Channel. Continue. Well, the buzz this offseason has been centered about 3 hours north up in Ann Arbor. But will it be warranted? That's one of the topics of discussion. We send it back over to Beau and the panel. Guys.
Well, I will admit, and we go into this, I will acknowledge that I love Jim Harbaugh because I love interesting. I realize it's 11 Warriors. I get it. Look, I love the guy. He's a delightful lunatic. I'm a fan of interesting, and he makes everything more interesting. As a guy who writes, Tim, has this not been the best gift that we have ever gotten?
He's pretty much perfect for that Michigan job. I love Jim Harbaugh, too. I think he's awesome. Obviously, an outstanding football coach, but more than that, it's just the circus that kind of comes with that. And I think that that's great for the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. It's great for college football in general. And, you know, he's unquestionably different than any other person, I think. But at the core, I think that Jim Harbaugh and Urban Meyer are a lot alike. They just are very different in how they present themselves, but they are essentially the same person deep down inside, and I think that it's pretty awesome.
It's a big win for all of us, Bob. How's it play with players?
The players enjoy it. I mean, he's a guy that draws attention to it. He gets you fired up about the rivalry with the things that he says. You know, trolling Gene Smith, not wanting to apologize. And you see the crazy stuff, you know, staying over at guys' houses, climbing trees, not wearing a shirt. I mean, all that stuff you look at and you're like, do I want to get beat by this clown? Like, those are the type of things that run through your mind. I mean, I'd like to think our staff has more mature coaches than what they have up there.
Could you possibly drink that much milk? Like, who the hell even does that? If milk was a bad choice. Eric, you know, it's all of this has been fine, but the question now becomes, can he coach with expectations? Now, he's done it at Stanford, he did it with the 49ers, but there's a lot expected of Michigan. I mean, some people say they could, you know, win the national title. I don't see it. I think they're a year away. I think they're overvalued. Is Michigan ready to compete?
I think they're ready to compete, but I don't know if they're really going to like come through the way people are saying. Just because I look at that game in Ann Arbor last year with Ohio State when they lost by 29 points, and it's pretty much the same team back, except they don't have Jake Rudock at quarterback anymore. Like they don't know, he won't announce who their quarterback is, and it's a team that's a bunch of seniors, which I think that's why the expectations were so high, which is fair. But I mean, this team lost by 29 points at home to Urban Meyer and Ohio State. So there's a lot of hype, and I do think it's warranted a little bit, but I don't know if they're really going to exceed all those expectations because, like you said, I mean, they're just ridiculously high, and I don't know from a national scope if they're ready to get there yet.
You know, it's interesting, guy you know pretty well, sneaking in the weeds a little bit, Dino, right? All he does is beat Ohio State and just cut our legs out from under us with national championships on the line, right? Mm-hmm. Twice now in the last couple of years. All the attention to Michigan, and all he does is win Big Ten championships. I keep looking at them and going, from our perspective, I look at them and go, I'm worried about them.
Well, the irony is, if Michigan State doesn't beat Michigan last year,
right.
Ohio State ends up in the Big Ten championship game and probably ultimately the college football playoff. And don't think Mark D'Antonio enjoys the shenanigans that Jim Harbaugh is pulling down the road either.
No, it's just a fascinating thing because Michigan State, like they can always play this nobody respect us card because in reality nobody does.
Right.
Year in and year out, Tim.
I agree, and it's funny because I think that when you look at Michigan State and the roster, the guys that they lost, and the guys they've got coming back, like personally, I think that they probably should take a step back this year. But that's pretty much exactly what Mark D'Antonio loves, and he loves all the attention that Ohio State gets. He loves all the attention that Michigan gets, and he's just sitting over there, having won 2 of the last 3 Big Ten championships,
chilling,
just
tweaking them with posters. And we talked about those teams, but 5 Big Ten teams ranked as well this season. So the conference, you feel like Penn State's going to get it going a little bit, or 4 rather, that you see him right there. You feel like Penn State with Franklin. This is a big year for him. We want to encourage you to check out Roar Lions Roar if you're curious, sister site for us, and also Go Iowa Awesome on the Hawkeyes. You see the Hawkeyes there. The Big Ten West, to me, with the respect to guys who run those sites, I have no interest in. I just don't. I think it's a 3-team league. So that's kind of where it is. It's Buckeyes, it's Sparty, and it's the Wacko Gym. That's how it is, Goldie. Yeah, you never know what you're going to get, and we're going to find out what we're watching for coming up next. We're also going to take a look at what we're out to watch for at 11warriors.com. Stick around. This is the 11 Warriors Report. Urban Meyer has been wildly successful everywhere he has been, and it all started 15 years ago right here in Ohio at Bowling Green. BG will always be a special place for the Buckeye coach. It's where he got his shot, it's where he proved he could compete, and it's where we all saw what he could do. This will be a much different opener for Meyer than most, as he fondly recalls his first game as the Falcons head coach, a win in Missouri.
Sat there and I looked at Shelley and said, what if we lose every game we play? Because, who knew? And she says, I bet you win tomorrow. And I looked at her and I said, we have no freaking chance of winning this game tomorrow. And woke up the next, something happened in the middle of the night. And I remember waking up and saying, we're going to, our staff and our players thought they'd win it, and they did.
No freaking chance. That's the setup for our guys and what they'll be watching for. Beau?
Yeah, that's an awesome line from Urban Meyer. Most of his lines are. Before we get to what we're expecting this week, here's what you can expect at 11warriors.com throughout the week. Loaded up on the site as always. It's football season. It's game time for us. This is how we roll, absolutely. Check out the oral history. This is cool. The czar, Jason, who's the boss, he says they holed up in Montreal I've been to Montreal. No one's holding up in Montreal. That's a good place to spend a few days. But nevertheless, it's a great read. It really tells you how the site came about and how the site was built. Some great stuff on Kyle Snyder. I know, Tim, you did one on that. That was good as well. The first game poster of the season is coming. We got a preview here. We're going to start doing that on the show weekly, but I just saw it on Jason's phone. It's pretty impressive. Also, we're going to have an interview with Paul Feinbaum. Who let that through? How'd that get done?
DJ got contacted.
God bless DJ. That's incredible. Complete Bowling Green scheme preview and the season preview package. So loaded up 11 Warriors, your home for Ohio State on the web, the best that there is and for a reason. All right, time for what we're going to watch for on the show. I forgot to get the order on this. Is Tim going first? I think Tim's going first.
Let's do it.
Bobby's going first. I lied. Bob's going first. Bob, what are you going to watch for this week in the opener against Bowling Green?
Well, if you want to see big plays down the field, it's obviously going to be taking advantage of a cornerback. And Ohio State losing 3 of the 4 secondary positions, only returner Garyon Conley. I think the safeties are pretty solid with Webb and Hook. The guys who I'm going to look at, though, over there, the slash, Denzel Ward and Marshawn Lattimore, both very talented guys, very fast guys. You know, Lattimore's battled some injury issues. Ward is a little bit younger, but I think both those guys are very good players, and people are going to be very impressed with what they see.
Is it possible that the backup cornerbacks at Ohio State would start for almost every other team, certainly in the Big Ten? Yeah. I mean, that's the type of talent that's been stockpiled.
Yeah, I really am looking at the defensive line. Larry Johnson said last week he feels comfortable with playing 12 guys up there, which is kind of an insane rotation when you think about. But they want to do at least 8 to 10, and you got a guy that everyone knows about, Nick Bosa, coming in for after his brother. And there's a lot of guys that they need to replace. The defensive tackle, Mike Hill and Tracy Sprinkle, kind of are leading there to do that. So I'm really interested to see, can those guys, plug up the run game, because Tyquan Lewis and Sam Hubbard are going to get after the quarterback.
Absolutely. Tim?
I want to see what the Noah Brown hype train is all about. He's been hyped up now since last season. Obviously had that unfortunate injury in fall camp last year, but everyone said he was going to be a starter. Had been having a really good camp, and then he got hurt and missed all of last season. So he's coming in this year as the #1 guy at wide receiver, and I want to see him play.
There's so many things that I'm looking forward to steal Game of Thrones. I mean, these are like Ramsey Bolton's dogs that haven't been fed, right? Like all these kids who haven't eaten, and that's what it reminds me of. The guy I'm singling out, those Malik Hooker. Bowling Green's going to throw it a lot. Everything I've heard, everything I've seen, he's a ball hawk. He's going to go get the ball. I could see a pick or 2 out of him. I just think he's going to be everywhere on the field. I'm excited to see him play. I'm excited to see all these young guys, but I'll highlight him the most. So that's what to watch for. Bob, Eric, Tim, we'll be back here next week for more, Goldie.
All right, thanks, Beau, and thanks for joining us for this debut edition of the 11 Warriors Report. If you liked what you saw, join us next Tuesday night and every Tuesday night throughout the fall. For Beau, Eric, Tim, and Bobby, I'm Aaron. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.